I had one executive tell me, he said, private planes are like crack and that it's an addiction. And if you can't use a private plane, you feel really deprived. And his company took the private planes away from the senior executives. And he said, I think I'm just going to quit.
Hmm.
You know, for him, it had become such a symbol of status and pride. And I thought, you are a really sad person. That's just sad.
Wow. Welcome to the Kalos Center podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Kalos Center podcast. Our guest today is Anne Hendershott. Anne is professor of sociology and director of the Veritas Center for Ethics in Public Life at the Franciscan University of Steubenville in Ohio. She earned her PhD in sociology and urban studies at Kent State University, her MS in educational counseling at Central Connecticut State University, and her BS in psychology at Central Connecticut State University. Anne is a prolific writer, having authored 7 books and nearly 300 articles addressing issues in ethics, politics, and practical theology. Among her more recent books is a fascinating work entitled The Politics of Envy, where Anne explores the many ways that the vice of envy is manifested in contemporary culture. Our conversation today will focus mainly on that topic, but we'll also address the subject of her most recent book, A Lamp in the Darkness, which is about the current state of Catholic higher education. So, Anne, welcome to the Kalos Center podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. It's good to meet you. It's good to hear about the center. You do amazing work there.
Well, thank you. We're excited about it. So, Anne, I'd like to start with a question about your faith journey. Specifically, when and how did you come to see your work as a teacher and scholar as a way of applying your Christian faith?
That's a good question, because I started out in secular higher education. I taught at the University of Hartford, which I loved, and was there for about 4 years. But when an opportunity arose to work in Catholic higher education, I just thought, I talked it over with my family, and they all said, would this job help you get closer to Christ? And I had not really thought of it that way. I just thought it'd be kind of nice to teach in a Catholic school. I'd never attended a Catholic college. I attended Catholic schools all throughout my life, from kindergarten on through high school. But I didn't go to a Catholic college. I went to a secular. But I just thought there might be a little bit more freedom teaching in a Catholic school. And I wanted that kind of freedom to be able to bring my faith to students and to learn from them, because I think that kind of interaction makes a huge difference. And so I taught at the University of San Diego for 15 years. Loved it. It's a great school. And when I got there in 1993, it was a very, very Catholic school, and mass every day, and students were there and some faculty were there. By the time I left 15 years later, though, things had kind of declined. And in terms of the Catholicity, it was still a wonderful school and great people, but it wasn't Catholic. I was like an outlier in that I was pro-life. And so it was a little disappointing. And so I went and taught at King's College. I had a friend who was at King's College, Marvin Olaski, you may know him. And he was the provost at King's. And I thought, well, they're very welcoming of Christians. And I thought they would, and I knew they would be welcoming of me also, because I wanted to teach in a school where the faith is vibrant. I kind of need that. And not that I need help being a Christian. I think we all need help. I don't think anybody can be a Christian in a box alone. I think you need the constant interaction with other Christians, whether it be students or peers or colleagues or supervisors, family. I just find that I need that. Right now, I teach online this semester, and I'm finding myself, I just miss that community of Christians. So I guess that's where I say it. But I miss the day-to-day interaction. This is a very long answer. I'm sorry. I sound like I'm filibustering, but that's my Christian life. It's a Christian life in community with others. I
Mm.
probably should have been a sister because then I'd know I'd be really prayerful. But I can be a better Christian when I'm with other Christians.
Yeah, good.
That's the long answer.
Yeah, that's certainly been my experience. I feel that I'm more productive, more invigorated,
Yeah.
and inspired. Yeah, to address issues from the standpoint of Christian conviction when I've got the reinforcement of my community. That's great. So your book, the Politics of Envy, it looks at the vice of envy as it plays out in every dimension of culture, interpersonally, economically, politically, and on social media. So what inspired you to write on that topic?
A lifetime of trying to avoid the sin of envy. Because I see envy in others and I see it in my own life that I try to avoid. From when I was very little, I was reminded of the vice of envy. I think envy is just a very dangerous sin. I think it's worse than pride because I think it is very close to pride because envious people are very prideful. They feel like they should have everything because they are more deserving than other people. And so I don't want to say I was a middle child, but I was a middle child. And I had a very brilliant older sister who I loved dearly. And I always felt like, I wish I could be as smart as she is, because she was the smartest kid in her class. Developed this ability to not be envious. And I think I had really good parents who read a lot of fairy tales to me. I knew the Bible stories, and, Catholic families are not as big on the Bible as we should be, but I do know the stories. And so I wanted to avoid that throughout my life because I could see myself going in that direction of envying people who had more. Not that we had very little. My parents were teachers. We were okay. But I would see somebody with things and I would want those things. And I knew that was sinful behavior. But as I've gotten older, I see envy where other people don't see it, but I point it out and then they see it. I think academia is filled with some of the most envious people I've ever met in my life. And I've been in academia for 35 years, a very long time. And I have gotten to know my colleagues. And at San Diego, there was this constant inferiority complex with colleagues. A lot of them felt that if we could just kind of get rid of our Catholic identity, it's so embarrassing, we would attain higher status. So I wrote a whole book called Status Envy about envy in academia, because I don't know if you've seen it in your academic life, but I see it all the time. Mm-hmm. And when somebody gets something good in academia, gets a grant or a big book contract, there's not a lot of congratulations going around. There's usually grumbling or sort of nasty things said about the person, selling out, especially if there's getting a popular press academic contract. And so there's an attempt to demean or diminish the abilities of another person. I see that as envy.
So how would you define envy? Let's get down to the basic definition of envy.
Yeah, covetousness is different from jealousy. Jealousy's okay, because jealousy is the desire to hold on to something or someone. Say you have someone you love, and you worry that that person might be attracted to someone else. And so you're jealous of that person because you want to hold on to that person. You're not envious of the other person who wants the object of your love. That's jealousy. Jealousy is an honest emotion. It doesn't hurt you so much, and it doesn't hurt the person because it's an object you love usually, or you just want to hold on to. Envy is ugly. Envy is seeing something that you might want or you might not want. I know that sounds crazy. Lots of people envy something that someone has, not because they want that something, but they don't want that person to have it. There's that joke about it's usually a Russian joke where the Russian has a neighbor who has a cow that gives great milk. And then he finds he could have a wish, anything he wants. And instead of wanting the cow that would give great milk, he would want that cow to be dead. And so I can't tell the joke very well, but it's a funny joke because they don't want the cow, but they don't want the neighbor to have the cow.
Yeah.
And
So
that's envy.
it's really a tragic vice, isn't it? It's sometimes described as the pain we feel at another person's pleasure.
Yes. And it does nothing for ourselves. That's the thing. Envy's the only of the vices that gives you no pleasure at all, really. Isn't that true? I mean, gluttony, food is really good, and greed, you get lots of good stuff.
Yeah.
Envy, it gives no pleasure to anybody. In fact, you're trying to take away pleasure from people.
Yeah.
That's an ugly, ugly vice.
So you note that envy is often depicted and rebuked in classic literature, from medieval poems to Shakespearean tragedies to modern fairy tales. What are some of your favorite examples and why?
Well, I was raised on fairy tales and the Grimm brothers, because I'm very old. And the original ones they were really Bible stories in a lot of ways. Something like Cinderella is a Bible story in a way. The ugly stepsisters are like the picture of envy. Those two ugly stepsisters, and they're ugly. Grimm wants us to know they're ugly because they're envious, and their sin is on their faces because they're so ugly with envy. And in the original stories, they're so envious of Cinderella that they try to make her ugly, and, all the ashes on her face, cleaning the fireplaces. And they're so desperate to marry the prince that they actually cut part of their feet off. And I write about that in the book because I have the original Grimm brothers. So their feet are all bloody because they've cut their heels off, so desperate to marry the prince and doing anything they can to keep Cinderella out of the picture. So all of those fairy tales almost all of them are envy. And I think the Grimm brothers know that we have to teach children about envy and to not envy people because it will destroy them. So things like, who's the fairest of them all? Snow White. And, that woman looks in the mirror and all of a sudden the mirror says, hey, it's not you anymore, lady. You're too old. It's Snow White. And she's just goes into a rage and has to kill the object of her envy, who is this young, beautiful Snow White. Snow White is a great depiction of envy. And now Disney has this new Snow White, that's all politically correct. They're not even going to release it because they've so distorted these fairy tales that, the kisses of princes don't work anymore. I know people love Frozen and the music is nice, but the men in Frozen, and there's no real moral message in Frozen. There's no envy message, where really the original stories are all about the moral vices and the way to be a moral person. And so I really highly recommend fairy tales.
Yeah.
Now I tell my grandchildren fairy tales, and my own children and their spouses worry a little bit because I tell them the real ones, because I want them to get the moral message. Fairy tales and stories were created for a reason. And that's why when you distort them, you're taking away the moral message, and it loses a lot. And so there was an exhibit here on the East Coast recently. It was called Envy, and it was a depiction of fairy tales in a museum, and it was fabulous because they showed envy. They depicted envy. And I went to that, and I think in some ways I got inspired for the chapter on envy. I had just left the University of San Diego, and I was kind of unhappy because I felt like that school could be so much better and so much more Catholic if they would just give up the internships at Planned Parenthood and give up the drag shows. I just thought it could be more Catholic.
Sure.
And so I wrote the article, wrote the book, Status Envy, because San Diego is a really good school. It's a great school. You could send your children there and they would be safe. It just could be better. And so I looked at all the Catholic schools. There's 230 of them, and I sort of evaluated them. But my bottom line is envy's a problem on those schools because they feel like second-class schools. And there are some Christian schools that are the same way, that are not Catholic schools, the ones who are not envious of anybody are the successful ones. I mean, you look at Hillsdale, you look at Christendom, Grove City, they don't have those kind of problems, even though they're not always explicitly Christian, but they're Christian. I feel sorry for the people who are at those schools and just think, if we just got rid of this Catholic stuff or this Christian stuff, we'd be so much more successful. And that's not true.
It's a pervasive problem, isn't it? Which motivated, that observation no doubt motivated your most recent book, which we'll talk about shortly. So lots of confusions about what envy is. And some thinkers like John Rawls have maintained that envy is a natural result of inequality, and that removing distributive inequalities will naturally prevent or reduce envy. And that idea has even been used as a rationale for socialism, as you know. So what is wrong with that line of thinking?
Well, in sociology, we call it relative deprivation, in that we always feel deprived relative to somebody else if we're always in that envy kind of cycle. If we're always looking at people to see if they have more than what we have. And so even people who are very well off will find somebody who is more well off, and they will resent that person. It doesn't matter whether you're very poor and you're looking at someone who is a little more or less poor than you are, or if you're very wealthy, making $1 million or more a year, and you're able to take great vacations. And then you look at someone who not only takes great vacations, but he has a private plane and takes them to those vacations. So you're going to envy that person because you feel relatively deprived. And so I have a whole section on relative deprivation because that's a problem too. Equality it's just not there. We look at others. I mean, I use René Girard, and I know you probably don't want to get into René Girard a lot in this interview, but he talks about a concept of mimesis. Mimetic theory is his thing.
Yep.
And
mimetic desire.
Yes, mimetic desire. We desire what other people have. All of us, me, probably you, everybody. We aren't even aware of it very often, but we desire that because we're not quite sure what we should desire. And so we look what others desire. So the private plane is looking really good to you. I had one executive tell me, he said, private planes are like crack, and that it's an addiction. And if you can't use a private plane, you feel really deprived. And his company took the private planes away from the senior executives. And he said, I think I'm just going to quit. For him, it had become such a symbol of status and pride. And I thought, you are a really sad person. That's just sad.
Wow.
So no, equality there's never going to be equality. Rawls should know that. We know that.
So you note that extreme envy often culminates in acts of violence. What are some examples? And
oh my gosh, I give some really scary ones in the book. A few years ago, I read a story, and I had to do research on it. This maid, she was a nanny, but she was also a housekeeper and did some things around the house for this lovely couple who had 3 children in New York City. And they were very good to her. I mean, she would go back to her home in the Dominican. They would pay for her to go there. They loved her so much. Sometimes they went with her and they would get a hotel room and they would bring gifts to her family who was back there. She had a son that she would send her money home to the mother the grandmother who was helping to raise the son while she was being a nanny in this New York. And one day the mother was taking one of the children to swim lessons, and the nanny was home with the other 2 children. And when the mother opened the door, the nanny was in the middle of completing a murder of the 2 children in the bathtub. And she waited till the mother got home so the mother could see her actually murdering the 2 children. And when they investigated, and questioned her. And she even told the media, she has so much and I have so little. And she has her child with her and I don't have my child with me. I don't want her to have those children.
Mm.
Sick, sick,
So,
sick envy. There's no other explanation. And even the judge in the case said, this is the saddest case of envy I've ever seen, because no one won in that. The nanny's going to prison for life. She'll never see her son again. The mother has lost 2 children.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's quite a few stories
sure.
like that.
Yeah.
That's a horrible story.
Yeah.
It was like chilling to me. But when you see that you open the door to envy, it's like you're opening a door to sin, and satanic, demonic things can happen
Yeah.
if you allow it into your life in that way.
Yeah.
That's the worst story of envy I've ever heard of.
Of all, all the deadly sins, one way or another, are sins unto death, right? Taken to their extreme, there's always death at the end of that slope, and that's a particularly vivid and depressing example.
I know.
Yeah, in your book, you explore the connection between envy and political activism. Can you comment on your findings there?
Well, I think a lot of socialism has to do with envy. I don't think you can have socialism without inspiring envy. And that's why I call it the politics of envy, because you're trying to persuade people to vote for you because you want them to hate the people who have more. I think a lot of the hatred toward President Trump is based on envy. I think there's a lot of other reasons that people don't like President Trump besides envying him. And when I've said that to Trump haters, they'll say, oh, I don't envy him at all. And I said, but he has this beautiful wife. He has children who love him. He has lots of stuff. And they're like, oh, I don't envy anything. People who envy, they don't want to admit that they envy. But I think some of it is. And I think a lot of the Antifa crowd, a lot of the haters on both sides of politics are motivated by envy of the other. And so they don't like people who have more than they do.
Mm.
And so they go out of their way to paint them in ugly ways. Yeah, I think politics is filled with envy.
So, you suggest that liberation theology, to kind of pivot into contemporary theology, you suggest that that's inspired by envy. Tell us, what is liberation theology, and how does the vice of envy figure in the minds of its proponents?
I was surrounded by liberation theology at the University of San Diego because I had some of the premier liberation theologians in the theology department. Brilliant people, really wonderful people, but I thought they were dangerous, to tell you the truth, because liberation theology it's not liberation from God, but it's liberation from the magisterium and the rules. And it's sort of like the idea of a church of the people. It's called a popular Catholicism and a popular religion. It's not just in Catholicism, it's in Christianity. And it's what we say it is. And so at the University of San Diego, they invited this former Sandinista commander, Maria Tellez, to come to our school, and they honored her. And I wrote an article for the Washington Times. You might want to look it up. It's very funny. It's called No Terrorist Left Behind. The State Department wouldn't let her come because President Bush wouldn't let her come. So I made myself a little bit unpopular, but I was just kind of furious that they would invite this commander too, who bragged that she had held this government officials at gunpoint in a ballroom in the Nicaraguan Revolution. She was like one of the leaders of the Sandinista Revolution. And they just adored this woman. They thought she was the greatest. And Notre Dame had invited her also. And she was going to take a teaching position at Harvard because everybody wanted this liberation type person, because liberation theology is closely aligned with politics. And so our theologians just love this woman. But like I said, she wasn't allowed to come. Tariq Ramadan is another one that was going to come, and he wasn't allowed to come either because he was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Faculty like those kind of people because they're outside, and they think it gives them status to know these kind of revolutionary people. I see it as part of envy, in that liberation theology is based on envy. They hate the rich people. And so the Sandinistas were overthrowing the rich people, the government, Somoza government. But the funny thing is, when Maria Tellez and the rest of the Sandinistas marched into Managua, the first thing they did is they took over the big palace houses that had been owned by the former leaders of the country. And they moved their own families in. Everybody else got nothing, but they were the high status people. So for me, that's a sign of envy. You know, if you were really a revolutionary and you wanted everybody to be equal and everybody to have wonderful things, you wouldn't have moved into the palaces.
So we've had so many Marxist revolutions over the last century or so, and we've still yet to see that classless society.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Yeah, because they're living in the palaces that they overthrew. So the theologians have adopted that in a lot of ways. They don't want the authoritarian church. And in Catholicism, you can't have that because we are a very authoritarian, hierarchical church. But at the University of San Diego, they are the higher status people, the liberation theologians. But it is a religion of the people. But it's not really of the people. It's of the leaders of the people who have. And it's a Marxism. It's really a socialist religion. And it's using religion to justify taking from the rich and giving to the poor or to them.
So you had mentioned, and I agree, this trend in academia of envy. It is pervasive in academia. You devote an entire chapter to that. And specifically this disturbing trend of mobbing in academia. How does that work? And what are some examples?
Yeah, mobbing is an interesting word to me. Some people would call it cancel culture today, but it's worse than cancel culture. Because mobbing, the word comes from the bird community, people who study bird behavior. And I study bird behavior a little bit. I'm not a bird watcher or anything weird, but I am interested in birds. We live on the ocean. And sometimes you'll see these little birds and they're going after this giant predator bird, like a hawk even. And they just kind of mob him. It's called mobbing, when a bunch of little birds go after a big bird, a predator bird, and they can peck him. They probably can't peck him to death, but they can defecate on him. They can make his life miserable, and he's cowering in the bushes because this mob of birds are. Well, I see that in academia, and I bring a couple of stories about that. It's happened to friends of mine. It happened at a Catholic college that I describe in the book at Mount St. Mary. A president was hired who was very wealthy. He came from the world of finance, had no academic experience. And so he retired from the world of finance. He made enough money. He wanted to do something with his life. He was a Catholic convert, a very good Catholic and a very good man. And so he came to be the president of Mount St. Mary's in Maryland. And the faculty despised him. And I was able to get online and look at what they were saying surreptitiously, because they do it on these websites where they think we're all academics here. They don't know that I'm looking. Saying things like he wears cufflinks, like that was a crime. And his wife gets her hair frosted as if that was a crime.
Oh, no.
And he had a Mercedes, as that's the big crime. And he wanted his office painted. And cufflinks. And he has his hair styled. All of these things, to me, just like envy. It was like a neon light. They hated him. He was attractive. He had a beautiful wife. He had 2 beautiful daughters. He was a good man, very Catholic, but he also wanted to change things at the university. So they had to go after his cufflinks. It's just crazy. They mobbed him. And he was used to business. And sometimes he would use profanity and, horrors of horrors. Not that he was yelling at people, but he would use words just because in business, people talk like that. My son came out of the Army. He was at West Point, and when he came home, sometimes he would use this language that he'd never used before because it's situational. And when this man came to academia, he was used to talking the way they do in a business world, which is kind of F word once in a while, I guess. And so they were just like, oh, I'm so offended by him. He's so offensive. And then he developed this program that was going to identify students who would fail the first year. And so that he would give them a chance to leave, because he thought that would help them. They wouldn't have to pay. But the faculty took it that he was trying to get rid of people and giving up on them. And he said a funny thing. He said, well, sometimes you just have to shoot the bunnies in the head. Well, you would think he was advocating for the assassination of all the students. And so they posted that online. They have this philosophy online community, and then it went viral. And so he's became known as the president with the Glock who wants to shoot the students in the head. You may remember that story.
Yep.
It was an interesting story. It was like Inside Higher Education, the Chronicle of Higher Education, made the newspapers, made national news about a president who wants to shoot students in the head. And he didn't want to shoot students in the head. But they mobbed him, and they were successful in removing him from the school. Yeah, academia is ugly. And was it Kissinger who said that the fights in academia are so cantankerous or rancorous because the stakes are so low? I don't know if that's true or not, but they can be really ugly.
Yeah, people can be very envious and peevish. And
oh yeah, it's happened to me. Mobbing usually happens to very high status people. So I can't say I was mobbed because I'm so high status, but my first book with the popular press that sold really well, and I was like on big talk shows and Michael Savage. It was called Politics of Deviance. And my colleagues at San Diego hated the book because I used sociology to try to understand how things like homosexuality got defined down from being something very deviant to something completely normal. And so they hated that book. And it was a great book, and it sold really well. It's probably my only book that really sold a lot. So I appreciate you're doing this. But after that book was published, they didn't realize I was conservative until that book was published, because I wrote things about, there was a chapter called The Postmodern Pedophile. And I talked about how, these academics were trying to define down pedophilia. And they didn't like this book because it brought attention to me. And part of it was envy. But I went on sabbatical. And when I came back, my office had been given to one of my colleagues who was pregnant. And when I came back, they didn't want her to give it up because, she's nursing. And then she was done nursing, and I still couldn't get my office back. And they had moved me into like a closet that used to be the janitor's closet. And it smelled like 409 and all sorts of bleach and mops and everything. And it was away from them. And I thought, wow, I've just been marginalized here.
I've heard that story so many times. When you first hear it, you think that's really creepy and unusual. And then you hear it again and again. And it's a way of, marginalizing. And as one former colleague of mine put it, sucking the oxygen out of the room on you to where you want to voluntarily depart. And that is kind of the end game. And many do.
Oh, I did.
It's just it makes life intolerable. It's brutal.
Yeah. I published the book in 2002. I was sort of gone by 2004. Yeah. I stayed part-time a little bit because San Diego, who leaves San Diego, And I had tenure. I'd been chair of the department. But all of a sudden, here I am. I'm in a broom closet that smells like bleach. How did this happen? Oh, now I know. I wrote a book that you didn't like.
Targets are, as you know, so often those who are the most published, the most high achieving, the most awarded faculty at a university. And that's what kind of confirms the envy hypothesis there. It's very real.
It is. And mine was nothing compared to other people's stories that I have in that book. And there's a couple of books that I didn't write, academic mobbing books. So if anybody's interested in this, some of the stories, it has ended up in death of people.
Yep.
Suicide. People have committed suicide. And they were the highest achieving people in their departments.
So sad.
But they couldn't take, I guess they couldn't take it. And it was sad because I thought they liked me.
So you also discuss social media as a major source of envy.
Yes.
What are some of the ways that social media tempts people to envy?
In the book, I call them envy farmers. They're sowing the seeds of envy. And, that can affect everybody, even old grandmas like me. I'm on Facebook because it's mostly grandmas because we like to see pictures of our grandchildren and we like to share stories and things like that. But I look at other grandmas on Facebook and they are having so much fun with their grandchildren. And my grandchildren live in Florida and Boston. So I only see them a few weeks a year, holidays. And other grandmas are like babysitting and they're doing crafts and we're going to the movies and we're going. So I'm a little envious of this. And I'm thinking, if I'm envious at age 70, for heaven's sakes, what must it be like for someone who's 17, who looks at people who are like going to Taylor Swift concert and they've got a new outfit and they're going, I think it's a source of envy. And I've read things about, what is it about social media that makes you feel bad? And it's usually looking at other people's experiences. It isn't so much looking at, they got a new car or they got a new house. It's more experiences. They're having so much more fun. It's the fear of missing out to the extreme. Look at how much fun they're having. I'm not having any fun at all. And I mean, I don't feel that way about my grandchildren. I'm still having fun with them. I'd like to have more fun with them. But I think it's so hard for kids. I'm just glad my kids were older. They weren't really my son was a little bit older. He's in his 30s. So he wasn't swept up in that, but I worry about my grandchildren because I have a 13-year-old grandson and he's adorable, but he's always worried about his hair. I mean, a 13-year-old boy worried about their hair is weird to me, but he said, "Oh, Grandma, you got to have the right hair now." And so for Christmas, I got him all these hair products. Isn't that weird? But he said, and I look on Facebook or I look on Instagram where his friends are, and they all have that same hair. Have you noticed? It's like it looks like broccoli on their head.
Yeah. What's really sad is when you see people, middle-aged guys, try to go for that similar look and think, whoa. Now, I mean, it's bad enough when teenagers are envying one another and they are manifesting that mimetic desire, targeted towards, really young people. Yes. That is.
But there's real pressure for a 13-year-old right now because boys at one time didn't care so much, but now cologne is big. 13-year-old, 14-year-old boys, cologne is huge and they cost very, very expensive now. So I think it's all social media and the running track suits that are like $300, $500 to have one of those. Social media is tough. And then there's also bullying. I don't know much about the bullying. My grandson's not bullied, but he's very much swept up in style and fashion and wanting to do what other people do.
I think that's an important distinction or just observation that you make, that it does tend to be more directed towards experiences as opposed to, somebody just got a new boat or something. We're more envious. We're more tempted to envy experiences. And maybe relationships, feeling left out of certain social circles. And it's tough. I want to pivot now to talking about your latest book, A Lamp in the Darkness. So in that book, you lament the mission drift of most Catholic colleges in the U.S., which is certainly true in the Protestant world and evangelical circles that I've run in. We've observed the same thing. You extol the faithfulness of a small minority of truly faithful Catholic colleges. And that work is actually, you say it's related to your work on the vice of envy. You've touched on this a little bit, but can you expand on that?
Yeah, because it's really a continuation of my previous book from 20 years ago. Status Envy. And that book, like I said, I had just left University of San Diego, and I had sort of an anger, I think, about me, like, why aren't you more Catholic? And lamenting the loss. And I didn't know much about the faithful newer schools. And so I wrote that book, Status Envy, and it's bothered me ever since. I don't know if you have written things and then 20 years later you're sorry, or you want to, I wish I'd said something else.
Too late. Feathers are in the wind.
Yeah, I know. This is the thing. And there it is on the internet too. So I wanted to write sort of a follow-up to Status Envy. And that's why it's called Lamp in the Darkness, because there are some really good faithful Catholic colleges, just like there are some really good faithful Christian colleges. I was at one for about 5 years at King's College in New York City, evangelical, started by wonderful people. Campus Crusade for Christ was instrumental in the start and had a really strong start. And I was there with Marvin Olasky. He and I had taught at Princeton together in the Madison program for a while. And we got to be really good friends. And when I left San Diego, I was just going to retire because I was old enough to retire. And he said, don't retire. And he said, come to King's. And it was a very welcoming and very vibrantly Christian college in the middle of New York City.
Yeah.
So we had a house in Connecticut, so I would take the train in every day. It was so much fun. I really loved it. But then Marvin left, and things changed a bit. When you find schools like that, they're very special because then you have a community of faith. And I loved it there. And they were very welcoming to me as a Catholic, much more welcoming than San Diego because they were more Christian in a lot of ways. They were acting on their faith. We need those schools. And so I wrote this book to try to tell people why these faithful schools are so important. And I'm teaching at one of those now. When I left King's, Franciscan was kind enough to invite me to come there. I never lived in Ohio full time, though. We have a few houses there because I kept buying houses thinking my husband would move there. And it was like, I don't think so, Steubenville, Ohio. So I mostly commuted there from Connecticut because Connecticut's really our home, even though we lived in San Diego for 15 years. But Franciscan is alive with the faith. It's just a very faithful place. And I think my subtitle is how these Catholic colleges can help save the church. Our church, the Catholic Church, needs saving. There are problems, like with a lot of Christian denominations. We have serious problems in that mass attendance is way down. Believers are way down. I mean,
yeah, it's true across the board, Yeah. What would you say are some of the essential factors involved when schools do remain faithful? What's the special sauce there?
The schools where faith is vibrant and alive means that the faith is permeating everything. It isn't just like an overlay of good theology and good student life ministry. It's when the faith is in every aspect. I mean, even in the curriculum. Like I teach a course called Deviant Behavior. And so when I teach that course, I talk about how I use my book, even though it's almost 20 years old. We look at behaviors that used to be deviant and are no longer deviant. Or we look at behaviors that weren't deviant in the past, but are deviant today. And we look at how we got there. And so something like homosexuality, we spend 2 weeks on. Pornography, we spend 2 weeks on. Pornography is like people wear T-shirts that say Pornhub on them. And I can't believe that people would wear a T-shirt that says, I love porn. I mean, they're not really saying but to me, they're saying it. Pornhub? Would you want your daughter to wear a Pornhub? But it's perfectly acceptable.
Pornography used to be something that only the creepy person going into a convenience store had the guts to, point to the clerk. I want that, magazine and that wrapper. Yeah. and then, ooh,
It's behind a wooden panel, so you wouldn't see it.
he just bought porn. He's a creep,
I know. Or now you got a T-shirt that says you love
Yeah.
porn.
It's become, mainstream. And, I think it was Daniel Patrick Moynihan who wrote a book 30 years ago on defining deviancy down.
Yes, it was. He was actually, he used that statement at a gathering of sociologists, and they kind of booed him when he did this because he was talking about fatherless families. And Democrats used to talk like that. They don't anymore, of course, because they don't want to be viewed as
Obama did a little bit, and then he got excoriated for doing so.
Yeah. Then he stopped. Oh, he said, never mind.
Yeah, that's not one of our talking points anymore.
No.
Catch up.
Yes, no. And so defining deviancy down, and that's just what we do in the class. We look at who does the defining. And so when you say, how is a Christian education or a Catholic education different? We're going to look at what the Bible says about these things. We're going to look at what the church teaches about these things. And then we'll look at what the Supreme Court says. So we'll spend 3 weeks. I always tell the students, we're going to spend 3 weeks on pornography. And they're like, we're going to look at the Supreme Court cases, that whole statement of, I don't know what pornography is, but I'll know it when I see it. That was one of the justices said that, but they get a kick out of that. But then we look at what the church would say about that. What is the moral view of pornography? And same thing with homosexuality, same-sex behavior, abortion. We spend 2 weeks on how abortion got so defined down that people will wear a T-shirt that says, I had an abortion. Yeah. Or somebody would accept an Oscar and say, the reason I got this Oscar is because abortion was available to me. Can you imagine that Michelle Williams would say something like that? So we really bring the popular culture into the class to look at how these things get defined down, because we won't understand how to prevent that from happening in our lives and in public policy.
And now we're seeing it starting to happen with pedophilia.
Oh, I know. Intergenerational intimacy now. Yeah. We don't call it pedophilia anymore.
Look, I'm just arguing for reducing the age of consent, right?
Yeah.
And who are you to say that a 9 or 10-year-old boy can't decide who they're going to be intimate with, right? So it's just a numbers thing. Come on. And we're all different. Everybody's wired in a different way. So,
we can't call them pedophiles. The new thing is MAP, a minor attracted person.
Yeah.
Like that's normal. That's normalizing pedophilia. And so, we do spend time on that too. It's still a great book, I have to say.
Why is, this might be obvious to us and to a lot of people, but not to everybody, why is the survival of faithful Christian colleges especially important when it comes to the flourishing of our nation?
That's the future of the nation. I think this nation can't survive without the Christian moral principles. I don't think. Our founders even said that. They said, in order to have this experiment flourish, this country flourish, we have to have moral men and women, of course, they knew that. But we need to have morality. And can you be good without God? I don't believe so, necessarily. I don't. And they didn't either. They didn't think either.
That's a debate in philosophy of religion, whether it is possible to not just behave in a moral way, because there's, of course, that's possible even among atheists, because there's borrowed capital there, right? There's kind of an assumption of basic Judeo-Christian values in many cases, but that they're willing to affirm without recognizing the kind of theistic metaphysics behind it. The question is whether you can, in a rational and coherent way, justify belief in any moral absolutes absent God. And that's what I'm skeptical about.
Me too. And I think, and getting back to the envy book, when we look at these stories, and Shakespeare knew better than it, look at Iago, in his hatred, his envy of Othello. It's sort of like we're hardwired. I mean, as a Catholic, I believe in natural law. I believe that we know what's right and what's wrong. not because of we're some rational being necessarily, but because we're creatures of God. We're children of God. And reading these stories, and look at Cain and Abel, I start the book with Cain and Abel. Abel could have just made his sacrifices more pleasing to God. He didn't have to kill his brother, but that's envy.
Back
That's
to
what
envy. Yep.
Yeah, that's what envy is.
Okay, so addressing such weighty issues as you do in ethics, social science, politics, you're doing immensely important work, and I affirm you applaud what you've done and what you're doing. You are no doubt driven by an ultimate sense of purpose, right? So let's close with your answer to this question. What is that? What, in short, do you take to be, here it is, the big question, the meaning of life?
Well, to be a good person, and not just to be a good person now, but eternity is a long time. I'm good friends with Tom Monahan. He's the founder of Ave Maria College, now Ave Maria University, and I serve on their board. It's a small, well, no, it's 3,000 now, in a college in Florida. And he started that college. He was the founder of Domino's Pizza, and he sold it. And he took all that money and he put it into this school. And he himself was an orphan. Well, his mother gave him up when he was in the Depression. I mean, he's in his 80s now. But his goal for Ave Maria is to help as many people as possible get into heaven, which I think is a noble goal. I just hope I get into heaven. And I hope my kids get into heaven. So I guess that's the long game. But Tom, he says it all the time. He says it to new students. He'll say it in interviews. I have him quoted in my book. My latest book, he gave me a great blurb for it. I'm very good friends with Tom. I think he's kind of a saint because he's given everything up. He used to own the Detroit Tigers. And he said it meant nothing to him. It just meant nothing because he was raised by nuns. When his mother gave him up, his father died, mother couldn't afford him, put him in an orphanage. But he was raised by nuns in the orphanage, grew to love and serve God, and he took it very seriously. And then got very rich, very, very wealthy. But he wants to die broke. He wants to give all his money because he wants to help people get to heaven. I think that's very noble. I'm not that noble. I just hope I can be a good enough person not to go to hell. Because I think I'm terrified of that.
Well, the whole idea of just thinking in terms of, helping others on the way to salvation, that's something that you would most likely hear from an evangelical, right? We want to see as many people get on board as possible. It could strike some listeners as ironic that that's the aim that's expressed by a Catholic like yourself. But I often point out to people that that Catholics outnumber evangelicals something like 3 or 4 to 1 worldwide.
Yeah.
There seems to be some evangelistic effectiveness there.
I think so. Well, and I think I've learned so much being at King's and having friends, evangelical friends, made a big difference in my life. I think Catholics should talk a little bit more about that.
Well, we're all, whether Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, evangelical, Protestant, we really are united in, the Nicene Creed for starters, but then we're about, doing kingdom work, right? God is going to bring about, and it's a promise, it will happen. He's bringing about this glorious kingdom that we will be there and enjoying and fellowshipping with others and doing good work for all eternity in the new heaven, in the new earth. So let's do what we can to bring as many people on board as we can, and we do that, by doing this good work that we're doing, you and I, hopefully as educators. But there's so many different domains and industries in which one can do good Christian work. So I applaud you for the work that you've been doing, and
Thanks, Jim.
I say, keep it up.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Kalos Center podcast. To get notified when we publish a new episode, please subscribe and let us know what you think by leaving us a review.